Welcome! I am Lucinda Curran, your host for the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium, a world first event. Today I have the pleasure of introducing you to Lyn McLean. So Lyn, what is the work that you do?
I work on the topic of electromagnetic radiation, Lucinda, and that's the radiation that comes from the sources around us like power lines, mobile phones, mobile phone base stations, and a lot of the wireless devices we've got in our homes.
And how is it that you came to do this work?
Actually, it was by accident. I was working for an environment centre, about 20 years ago actually, and one of the committees dealt with this particular issue, and I ended up by default having to take over and do the work on that committee, and I found that it was the most fascinating subject that I'd ever encountered, and if we had time I'd run you through some of the things that I found so exciting about it. But the other thing that I found was that there are so many people that were badly affected by it, and that over time I built up knowledge that I could use to help them with. And so for that reason, I think I've just continued to do this work, that there are people who need help and I feel that I can contribute and help them, so I keep going.
That's great, and I think we do have time to share some of those exciting aspects if you'd like to.
Oh, I have to tell you about the salamander then. The salamander is such an interesting creature. I don't know if you know the salamander, but it's closely related to the frog. Now, I read a book back in those days when I was at the Environment Centre that was about some of the experiments that have been done on salamanders, and it's a little bit gory, so brace yourself, but scientists discovered that if they cut the leg off a salamander it would regrow. But if they cut the leg off the frog, which was its close relative, it wouldn't regrow. So why was that, they wondered. And the scientist who was doing this work discovered that the salamander has a very, very slight electric field, a negative electric field at the point of injury. So that's why its limb was able to regrow. But a frog doesn't have that. That same scientist, who was Robert Becker, an orthopaedic surgeon, was then able to use that technique, that is putting a really, really slight negative electric current at the site of injury, to regrow bones. So he was able to regrow bones on a rat, but also human bones. And so that technique is now used to knit difficult to heal fractures. And I just think that's tremendously exciting. That tiny electric current makes a difference to the way our bodies heal and repair. And so Becker at that time thought, well, if these currents are affecting the way our bodies heal and repair, would it also be true that they could be affecting us in a negative way? And so he started to do lots of research on the harmful effects of radiation, and that's when his funding ran out by surprise.
It's typical, isn't it, that happens?
Yes, that's right. But it was the beginning of a steep learning experience for me, and I've just found it fascinating. I continue to find the science of this fascinating.
And so did you have a personal aspect to this journey as well?
Oh yes, I've had my encounters with electromagnetic radiation, so yeah, I do know what it feels like to feel it, but I also know that people can overcome problems that they have with EMR, and I believe they can overcome just about all of the problems they have with EMR. And it takes time and dedication and patience. But I hope that by working with people over a period of time that we do get good outcomes. I'm still here, I'm still trying.
It's great, and I totally agree with you, and it's lovely to hear, because I think what happens all too often, not only are people told it's firstly all in your head and you're crazy, and it's like the placating and patronising pat on the head, here, take some drugs and off you go, we'll just medicate you. But they also then tell people they're never going to get better, which is the absolute opposite to what I believe. I believe, like you do, people can completely recover, if not completely, at least 90-something% better, and get on with life.
I absolutely agree. There's always a solution, and I think that you just need to find the right solution for you. And I'm currently working on a book that I hope will have a lot of those solutions for people, but the first step is to reduce exposure to EMR, so that's the focus of what I'll be talking about today.
In a bit of a nutshell, why are you so passionate about working with EMR and helping people with it?
It's still a bit of a mystery to me, Lucinda, after about 18 years. I think for one reason that I do know that EMR is affecting a lot of people, and I know that authorities are not recognising that. So there's a little bit of the crusader in me that wants to make people aware of something that I just think is so tremendously important. And I think to bring public awareness to an issue that is affecting all of us, but a lot of people are just not conscious of that impact. I have absolutely no doubt that in a few years' time, society is going to be aware of the really significant problems caused by this radiation, and that we'll be looking back and saying, oh my gosh, why did we do this back in 2014?
Exactly. It's a bit like the asbestos and the DDT and all of that, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that we're seeing a repeat of that. But the trouble is that EMR is so pervasive now that it's around nearly everybody in society most of the time. And so this, as far as I'm concerned, is asbestos plus lead plus tobacco all rolled into one package.
It's nasty stuff. We could touch on a little bit about the work you do, because you're the director of EMR Australia and you do quite an extraordinary amount of work. So could you share a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, certainly. I set EMR Australia up over 10 years ago, and my reason for doing that was to be able to support myself to continue doing the work of helping people and being a community advocate and writing and so forth. So I know that my critics will claim that I do this to make money. I can certainly assure you that spending lots of time doing things to support and help the community is not lucrative, in answer to my critics. But I do work that I hope will benefit society. One of the things that we do is we write EMR and Health. We publish EMR and Health, which is a free online newsletter, so that gets information to absolutely anyone about what's happening on this issue, what the research is showing, so that people can become informed very easily and find references to support those things that we're saying. The other thing that we do is we make available to people meters for measuring their exposure. We hire them out so people anywhere in Australia can get this resource, and then we have over the phone consultations where we can talk about what people are exposed to, what they can do about that, because there's always an individual solution. And then I try to take people through the various steps in order to create a safe environment. So that's very exciting for me, because I can see people's understanding of this issue growing and their awareness of what's going on in their own home, and certainly people creating safer environments for their kids to grow up in, which is, again, tremendously important to me.
And actually just touching on that aspect in terms of the children and their safety, just the fact we've got the wireless baby monitors that are in the crib, in the cot, right next to a baby's head. Tell us some of the risks involved with that.
These devices emit wireless radiation, and children, of course, are the most vulnerable of all the people in society, because their brains are still developing, their skulls are still developing, they absorb more radiation than adults. So for lots of reasons we should be protecting them, and to put wireless devices close to children is really asking for trouble. I mean, if we start to look at the research on this, if we look at the research on mobile phones, for example, it is finding increased risks of brain tumours for heavy and long-term users. Now, that's research done on adults, but what happens if children are exposed to this when they're babies or when they're toddlers? What are going to be the risks there? And we don't know. There's no research on that, of course, because this is a very modern trend. But I think that we're going to see the answers to that in a few years' time, and I'm a little bit worried about what they might be. So it makes a lot of sense to reduce exposure as a precaution now.
Definitely, and I think that's the best way to go about it, isn't it? Taking the precautionary approach. We don't know. We suspect it's actually very dangerous. There isn't evidence yet. There can't be, because things take a while to show up, but just taking the precautionary approach is sensible.
Well, that's right, and we do it in so many areas of life. I mean, I can remember the days when we used to drive in cars without seat belts and without baby capsules. So we've introduced those things to society as precautions, not because there's a guarantee that we're going to have an accident that will be fatal, but because we might. So it's a standard procedure to reduce exposure to potentially dangerous things. Why would we then not do it in connection with EMR when there are now thousands of studies that are showing harmful effects from this radiation?
Absolutely, and great points. So just let's talk a little bit about your journey now. What have you observed during this incredible journey you've had?
Well, certainly I've seen changes in the science. I've seen lots more evidence of harm become apparent, to the point where I think it's really difficult to ignore the risks of this radiation now. I've seen changes in people. There are a tremendous number of people out there who come to us and tell us stories about what's happened to them and about the problems that they've had. For example, one woman rang up and told me about the awful headaches that she'd been getting, and she'd been to a doctor and her doctor had given her medication and said, go home and take the medication. She did and didn't get better. Actually, what she did was hire some of our meters, and with our meters she was able to identify that her cordless phone was giving off a really high field, as cordless phones generally do. And she'd had that cordless phone for 6 months, which ironically was about the same amount of time that her headaches started developing. When she stopped using her cordless phone, her headaches went away. So it wasn't the medication she needed, it was to stop using the cordless phone. Stories like that about just every possible exposure, people who use mobile phones who get headaches and burning and tingling in their scalp, they stop using the mobile phone and their symptoms go away. People who sleep near or slept near a computer, the computer was on the other side of the wall from them, would wake up with terrible headaches. They eventually connected the headaches with the computer, moved the computer somewhere else, headaches went away. So over and over and over again, we see this connection between exposure and people's symptoms. And I know that a lot of people will say, okay, well, it's probably all in their mind. People probably know that their computer gives out magnetic fields and therefore assume that when they move it, that their headaches are going to get away, and so it's psychosomatic. But the thing is that we're seeing these sorts of effects in children, we're seeing them in animals, we're seeing them in people who love their technology and weren't worried about their technology. I don't think that we can explain these effects away as psychosomatic.
I think that's a great point. And I think one of the other things that always concerns me is a lot of people who go to seek medical help with symptoms that are related to EMR, EMF exposure are often sent off to get MRIs or CT scans, which absolutely terrifies me because it's like a massive exposure to even more.
Yeah, well, what's interesting is that quite a few people have told me that their problems from EMR started after they had a series of X-rays or MRIs, and that's because MRIs, and particularly modern MRIs, have got really, 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 really high magnetic fields to the point where our government's been considering increasing the amount of radiation that the community can be exposed to just to accommodate these sorts of devices. So exposing people to the same sort of fields that are causing problems in the first place doesn't seem like a very sensible outcome to me. And of course I understand diagnosis is important, but wouldn't it be better just to reduce our exposure to EMR first of all and see if that solves the problems?
Totally agree with you. Everybody, Lyn McLean will be a speaker at the Environmental Sensitivities Symposium, and you can find out more at environmentalsensitivitiessymposium.com.